So Nicola, do we have Representative Casten with us?
Advocate for it.
Hey, Leslie, this is John from the office. Rep. Casten is still voting on the House floor. So you caught us right in the middle of a 4-vote series. So we apologize about timing, but
Okay.
he should be back in a few minutes. If you all have other things you'd like to cover with your agenda, you can go ahead and do that before he gets back. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to give sort of a brief overview of some of the items we've been working on and take any questions. And we are hoping that he can join us in the next 5 to 10 minutes or so.
Well, John, what would you think? What would be best? I can, like I've just said to our group, I can talk forever. So
Yeah.
I'm really good at tap dancing. I can stretch, I can shrink. So I did stop at a pretty good spot in our agenda. If you have some things you want to tell us about, we'd love to hear your words of wisdom.
Great. That works for me. And it's nice to be with everybody today. I know Rep. Casten was very much looking forward to chatting with all of you. And has had the opportunity, Leslie, I know, to chat with you last August, but also with this group last year, back also in a virtual setting. But just to cover a couple items that we have been working on over the last couple of months that may be of interest to you all, and it should be no surprise that Build Back Better has been top of mind here in Washington, and making sure that we can get that $555 billion climate investment across the finish line in short order is really something that the congressman has been pushing for relentlessly over the past several months. I think it's important to note when you put that $555 billion in context that there's, first off, it is the largest component of the bill in the sense that back when the package was roughly 3.5 trillion instead of 1.7 trillion, the climate was expected to receive this amount of money. So it was the only topic that did not receive a haircut in terms of overall spending, which was very exciting, because once the package started shrinking, the concern was that some of these monies would come out of the climate and energy and environment package. So the overall size is impressive and important, and is the single largest investment made in our climate, or will be the single largest investment in United States history. When you look back at the most recent investment, which was post 2008 with our stimulus package, this is almost 5 times the amount that we spent on green energy compared to 2009. So it's really a tremendous investment. So if you're looking at Build Back Better and trying to figure out what actually is going to make a big impact, and yes, if you are hearing some background noise, I apologize. It's some folks in our office. Yeah, in terms of Build Back Better, when we're just looking at a few key climate wins to highlight and what has been most exciting for our office, and some of these provisions too, we had a key role in making sure that these got across the finish line. So probably most important to flag would be the Simplified Tax Credits, over $300 billion of tax credits in the power sector specifically. We're looking at folks having the chance to install solar, geothermal, wind at a 30% reduction of current rates, which is excellent, and further subsidies on the commercial side as well to try to increase installation of clean energy. But beyond that, there's subsidies in the transmission and grid space as well, which is something that the congressman has been quite focused on. I think there's roughly reports are saying that we have the potential of up to 1,000 gigawatts of new generation in the renewable space, which is a tremendous amount of energy. But the question is, how can you actually get it to load? How can you get it up to the point where the people actually who need to use the energy in major cities have the ability to do so? So a lot of that will be grid focused. and trying to, get some new projects online, interregional projects that will be able to spread that renewable energy all across the country. And specifically what Build Back Better would do is there's a 30% ITC for new high voltage transmission lines and grid level energy storage. So that's something that hasn't existed before, unlike the solar and wind and geothermal ITCs. This is brand new. Some other items that I'll flag for you, you probably have been reading about the EV tax credits. Currently, there's a $7,500 credit that would apply across the board to all folks purchasing a new electric vehicle, but now there's an additional subsidy included for $4,500 if the car was made by union jobs here in America. And that's something the Senate is still taking a look at that provision to make sure it survives parliamentary rules over on the Senate side, but we're hoping that stays in, because that will really make electric vehicles much more accessible to a broad array of Americans. Direct air capture technology, which is a type of carbon capture sequestration, will receive $180 a ton for those removing carbon from the air. Also something that we have fought for in the past, although the congressman has been quite specific about making sure that it's direct air capture as opposed to some of the other oil and gas related CCS that we don't view to be as effective or proven technology. So this is all to say there's state efficiency in EV programs, charger networks, electric buses, ways to improve the environmental efficiency of our ports, climate civilian corps, really exciting new provisions that have not been seen before that combined really make an effort to deliver us to a pathway towards decarbonization in line with the Build Back Better agenda that the president has signed us up for. And I did see the congressman walk in the office, so you'll hear from him in a second. And I can admit him. Here we go. Great. So, Congressman, can you hear us?
I can.
Great. So I was just giving some Build Back Better best highlights, but I know they'll be eager to hear from you, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. I apologize for running late, and I suspect looking at the vote thing here, I may get pulled out early. But it is always a pleasure to see you all, even if I'm only staring at my own face on the screen virtually. And thanks for all that you do. I think the most important thing, and John probably hit on this before, is that the Build Back Better is going to simultaneously be the biggest, most impactful, most significant climate investment that the United States has ever made in our history, going back to 1776. And at the same time, it is going to be insufficient. And I think we need to both, celebrate how big this is and not rest on our laurels as we go forward. We are, I think the estimates are that it's going to reduce CO2 emissions by something on the order of maybe as much as 40, maybe even 50%. There's a lot of assumptions that give that upper end. The $550 billion of investments in clean energy infrastructure over the next 10 years, so roughly $55 billion a year. And that's a really, really big deal. Personally, some of the things that I'm most excited about are things that I was fighting for over a decade ago when I was in the position that you all are in right now, and I was just a guy in the clean energy industry trying to get Congress to do things. And I was trying to get Byron Dorgan to permanently get rid of tax incentives for clean energy, because I was sitting there, much like many of you probably are, saying I'm sitting on a lot of depreciation, a lot of interest from the debt we took out to finance these projects. I don't have tax liability, but I still want to go and get these projects done. And so we've finally got refundability baked into these tax credits. The tax credits that are there, of course, they're for solar, near and dear to your heart, but also really importantly for transmission, for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, because practically speaking, what I think we've all realized, Secretary Granholm has been one of the most outspoken proponents of this, is that if we are going to decarbonize at the pace the science demands, we have to electrify huge chunks of our transportation sector, probably a lot of our residential sector as well. And in order to do that, we're going to need to build at least 1,000 gigawatts of new energy sources, new clean energy sources. And we're going to have to build that in about 10 years. That is basically building again all of the installed capacity of the United States in just a decade. That sounds crazily ambitious, but I'd point out to you that we basically electrified all of rural America in about the same period of time in the New Deal era. And so maybe the only constraint we have is our ambition. But we've got to go get that done. We've got the tools to do it. And once we get it passed, I think the hope is that what we're going to trigger through federal spending will catalyze a lot of private sector on the back. Tax credits are an obvious place where that happens because we're, of course, maybe just providing that 20, 30% tax credit and counting on private sector to fill that out. But a lot of the other stuff, we're not providing enough money to build out an entire EV charging network in the country. But I think we're hopeful that the amount we're putting in is going to increase the demand for electric vehicles, which in turn is going to cause more consumers to go to their utilities, their other fuel providers, and say, we really want you to get in this game as well, and bring a lot of that forward. So we're hopeful, but we're not going to rest on our laurels. And this is where I get back to the fact that we've got to recognize that as big as this is, it's not sufficient. We have basically already overshot the 1.5 degrees of warming. We know that if you read the IPCC report, that's what it says, but you've got to parse down a little bit because the IPCC report says that we're at 1.1, but in actuality, it says we're at 2, but for the fact that we've got 0.8 degrees of cooling that's been created by all the soot we've blown into the atmosphere, which is going to settle out. So we've got to get CO2 down to 0 yesterday. Which means that we're going to have to find ways to change agricultural practices, maybe do some other things to go negative on the environment. And oh, by the way, that's the reason why we're pushing so hard on a lot of these methane fees, because methane is a short-term climate forcer. If we can cut that down, that's the best way to ameliorate the fact that we have this short-term cooling forcer and all the stuff that's going up there. So we've got to push really hard. We've got to keep pushing, and I leave just with the genuinely heartfelt thanks for all that you all do. We are at a moment where the United States government is finally acting, but we're at this moment in no small part because folks like you have been leading long before we were. So it is your success in building out an industry, deploying these technologies, getting consumers to recognize how awesome it is when you don't have to pay for electricity anymore. It is those things that have created the political possibility for Congress to finally, I don't even know what you call it. You can't call it leadership if you guys were the ones who were there first, but to finally create the inertia to get it through the rest of the way. So thank you for all that you do. And I see we've just called the next vote. So John, I will wait until you tell me. I have to absolutely take the hook here.
Yeah, you're good for about 10 minutes or so. So we'll keep going with some Q&A. Okay. I see some items in the chat, and Leslie, I'm happy to run through those. Unless you were planning on.
Yeah, John, if you want to take that on, that would be great.
Okay, great. So Congressman, let's talk a little bit about Build Back Better's path in the Senate with our favorite Senator, Mr. Manchin, and how that might look over the next couple of weeks.
How many of us are being asked to be mind readers of a certain senator in West Virginia right now? I don't see Mr. Manchin on a daily basis. The last time I saw him was when we were both getting our COVID test together for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act signing. What I understand from my colleagues in the Senate is that there are relatively few points of disagreement that remain, and that we are paced, to be fair, both by Mr. Manchin and by the parliamentarian who has a lot of work to do. When I was with Senator Durbin, who was, of course, the whip earlier this week, he seemed cautiously optimistic that the Senate could get to resolution before the end of the year. And when I say cautiously, I mean, like, if I was a betting man, I'd say it's maybe like a 52-48. It's not a slam dunk, but that they're paced by resolving those couple open issues. The only big issues on the energy side that I've heard he continues to have some heartburn over is is the methane fee, which I really hope we're through on, because it's just a suicide pact not to include that methane fee. But I've not heard officially that he's on board with that. And then had some concern last I heard with the additional credit for EVs for union-made EVs. Right now, there's about a $7,000 tax credit for EVs that boosts up to $12,500 if you buy a U.S. union-made EV. I do not know why someone who represents people who work would be opposed to that. People who work in America, of all places. But I've heard that there's some tension there. But look, if those things drop out, it will make the bill worse, but it still is a very good bill. I've not heard anything that's specific and germane to issues that you all care about is held up. But until the whole bill's done, none of it's done. So that's about the best play-by-play I can give you right now.
Great. So we did have a clarification question on what happens with the solar investment tax credit. So you're correct that will go from 26% to 30%, but importantly, as I'm sure you all know on this call, we're looking at a 10-year extension as opposed to the year-to-year ask when we typically see you all up here on Capitol Hill. But Congressman, if you wanted to say anything else about the solar ITC or PTC and the effect you'll think that'll have moving forward, that would be great.
Well, the other really big thing, and John, thanks for the clarification, but refundability is such a big deal, and I hope you all appreciate that. Back in my prior life, when the ARA, the 2008 stimulus bill, was passed, that was the last time we had refundability, and we did a $7 million clean energy project in North Carolina that we never would have done without that. Number one, we needed the extra, we needed to reduce the cost to make the project pencil, but you just couldn't do a tax equity structure for a $7 million deal. And every tax equity financing I've ever seen, for every dollar the federal government gives you, you end up with somewhere between 90 and 95 cents in your pocket. Not because the banks are evil, but that's sort of the cost of the deal structuring fees once you do these complicated tax equity swaps. So by getting the refundability in there, in addition to what John mentioned, it's going to make it possible for you to finance projects that are smaller than the ones you would have been done before. I think it's going to be a huge boon for rooftop solar, for community solar. A lot of solar isn't in the $50–60 million size range. That's really well suited for tax equity. So I think it's going to just hugely expand the number of players who can participate in this arena, which is good because we've got to deploy as much of this technology as quickly as we can.
So Congressman, the next question is, do we anticipate that the tax credit will become a direct pay incentive or remain as a tax credit structure?
My understanding is that there is the option to take this as a direct pay, but not the obligation. So you'll be able to select whether you think you'd rather do it the other way. My guess is for a lot of you on this call, that's not going to be a hard choice, but certainly some of the regulated utilities who are doing this, where they've got some complicating issues around how things work into rate-based capital, the dynamics are a little different for them.
Great. So moving to a different topic, and that of natural gas. What have you seen in terms of how Build Back Better will have an impact on the build out of natural gas power plants in the United States? And I know you've been frequently on Twitter talking about natural gas price volatility as well.
So I think anything that's going to affect natural gas from Build Back Better off the top of my head is going to be a little bit of a bank shot. It's going to be a bank shot. If we have methane fees, that's going to make a big deal on gas distribution infrastructure, which is really, really important. And I leave it to, economists and folks in the industry to speculate whether that, how that changes the access to gas to the pipeline. Certainly everything that we're doing to try to accelerate the deployment of electric transmission is huge. We have not got full sole side authority for FERC for transmission siting. But I think, to the extent that any of you on this call have had experience, building gas assets, the way that gas plants are currently built is to say, let me find a node on the electric grid I can hook into, and then run a pipe of natural gas all the way out to that node, because it is so much easier to permit a gas pipe than just to permit a transmission line. To the extent we debottleneck the grid, we get the transmission in the right places. If we're doing it right, it's going to dramatically change the incentives of where you build assets of any type and in particular, some of the gas deployment we've got. So that's a bank shot. I think all else equal, if we're doing it right, that's going to accelerate the deployment of those power gen sources that can't be piped. I think you know some of them. It's hard to put sunlight in a pipe. It's hard to put geothermal in a pipe. It's hard to put wind in a pipe. And so, you know, I would think that will bring cheaper sources forward that are going to, you know, probably slow the rate of gas deployment. But that's not because that's an intent of the bill. The intent of the bill is to get the CO2 down. And if we're doing that right, that's presumably going to make our biases towards low zero carbon sources of energy.
Great, Congressman. I know you and I have had a recent discussion about the supply chain concerns impacting the industry, and we're getting some questions in specifically around the challenges of roofing materials and a bottleneck developing that might delay delivery of these products till 2023. So curious, you know, what is, or we've had some folks ask, you know, how Congress is looking at this issue and any thoughts you may have.
So I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't want to sound unduly sanguine. There are some real supply chain issues in the economy, as anybody who's tried to buy something recently is keenly aware of. At the same time, the causes of those supply disruptions are largely the result of this huge sort of herky-jerk our economy did through COVID, that we totally shut down. People stopped traveling. We shifted from a service economy to a consumption economy, and then we shifted back. And that's just led to these massive bottlenecks and disruptions in the system. Those are going to be worked out over time, just through the natural course, but it's going to take a little bit of time, and there's going to be some pain to do it. The second thing that we've seen anecdotally, and I suspect you've probably seen this as well, is that throughout the whole supply chain in almost every sector, the businesses who have been disciplined over the last 30 years to really minimize the amount of inventory that they carry and focus on just-in-time delivery throughout the whole fuel chain, the supply chain rather, have I think taken a lesson over the last 24 months that's a bit more brittleness than they'd like to have. And so we're seeing some early anecdotal information from some of the federal reports that that people are basically normalizing to a higher level of working capital and maintaining their business. That will level out at some level. Maybe it'll ease back, but in the short term, that appears to be having the practical effect of, depending on where you sit in the supply chain, either looking like an increase in demand or a reduction in supply, but it's creating some tensions. There are things we can do. Certainly the president easing, getting some of the ports to work 24/7 is helpful. But my gut feeling, as someone who spent more time in the business sector than the government sector, is that this will be resolved through the natural vagaries of the business cycle faster than any particular policy tool we might apply from Washington. But if you got good ideas, let us know.
Great, thank you. So unfortunately, we're going to have to send you back to the floor in about 4 minutes. But two final questions for you as we wrap up. So the first would be that you've spoken frequently, both in the media, but also in congressional hearings about the need to build out clean energy to scale and essentially get infrastructure on board. So we've got some questions about, how permitting and federal laws can sometimes be a hurdle to this. And do you envision Congress making any changes in future legislation to items like NEPA or ESA that could help move these projects forward, or where would you go from there?
It's very hard to see the things that need to get being done on a bipartisan basis. And as against that, it's hard to see some of the things that would be horrible, but there is a contingent that wants to get done doing them on a bipartisan basis. So, some of the really aggressive things my colleagues across the aisle would like to do to gut NEPA are not going to get done, given where the majorities are. On the other hand, there are things that I would really like us to see around permitting for, expediting the permitting of transmission assets, for example. And we tried to get that in the Build Back Better, and we just couldn't get that through on a bipartisan basis across the aisle on the other side. So yes, there will be some tinkering around the edges, but I think that beyond what's in Build Back Better, it's hard for me to see us doing much more on that at the legislative level until we've got a little bit more plus majority in the House and Senate.
Great. And as we wrap up, last but not least, what support do you need, Congressman, from groups like ISEA to help advance these priorities across the finish line? And once you answer that, I'll turn it back to Leslie to give a quick wrap up.
Well, here's my single biggest request that I make of everybody in the clean energy space. The dirty energy industry is extremely well organized in Washington. The clean energy industry is not. And there are very few people, once you get beyond myself and Jerry McNerney and Mike Levin, I'm not sure there are any other members, certainly in the House, who have spent a career in the clean energy sector before coming here. And what that means is that when the clean energy sector comes to, at appropriation season or any other season and says, I want a PTC for my technology, I want an ITC for my technology, I want R&D money for my technology. There are very few members who have the sort of the gut understanding of your industry well enough to know how those things fit together. And so they end up being traded off against each other rather than being at a point of saying we want to incentivize people to do the right thing and stop subsidizing people to do the wrong thing. And in a nutshell, that's how we end up in the world we're currently in, where we subsidize the fossil sector by $650 billion a year. And we find ourselves talking about $550 billion over 10 years to the entire clean energy sector and get pressured to say, well, are we being too generous? So my big request for the clean energy sector is work with your colleagues across all technologies, across all business approaches, advocate for policies that articulate the goal and reward the goal, and do not advocate for policies that say, I only want you to reward my particular path, because Congress just isn't at a high enough reading level to understand the distinction between those 2 points. And it's lonely for those of us who do, to try to push for more goal-oriented solutions. So let's all just start rowing in the same direction.
Excellent. And I'll turn it back to Leslie.
Thanks. That's great advice to end on, Representative Casten. Well, I just wanted to jump back in and thank John for stepping in and keeping us entertained and informed before you could get in the room. Representative Casten, I didn't get to read your bio and all the great things I was going to say about you, but this is the second year, to everybody here, this is the second year that Representative Casten has taken time out of his extraordinarily busy schedule to speak to our organization. I'm proud to say that I voted for Congressman, and he is my representative. And honestly, could you ask for anything more? Your energy that you're putting in, we appreciate your energy so much, Congressman, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedule, and thank you for all the hard work that you do to ensure that we're going to have a livable planet moving forward. Honestly, I think that's the bottom line for all of us, and easing the way for us to do the work that we need to do to accomplish that.
Thank you. You're very kind. I really do appreciate all the work that you do, because we need you. We need you to make our jobs easier. Be well, everybody.
Take care. All right.
Thanks so much.